I want to introduce to you the wonderful Stefon Harris, who is on campus here at Brown today, mainly to play the concert tonight with the Brown Jazz Band. And it's a super big pleasure to have you, Stefon. I started this position as the Jazz Studies Director at Brown recently, and one of the things that was so enticing, or is so enticing about my work here, is that I'm able to invite interesting and amazing people like you. And when I was confronted with the question, who to invite first, you were the first person that came to mind.
Man. Thank you.
And one of the reasons is, well, I know you very well. We've worked together in the past, and but I think what is so special about you is that, unlike many artists, you are somebody who is able to unite the different aspects of artistry and put that together and not have it compartmentalized like many other people do. Because you go on a website of any kind of musician, and the first thing you read is like, oh, he's a composer, saxophonist, educator, wizard, etc. And but a lot of times people who are in these fields, they do this very compartmentalized and separately. But you're actually somebody who I would call a big picture artist. And I know from our many conversations in the past, you actually sat down and you wrote a mission statement for yourself. Yeah. And I think that could be something that's very interesting to the students. And is that something you could talk about?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. I often write down thoughts. I have like these notebooks, these like 100-page music notebooks, and they're filled. Well, they're 500 pages, those big, thick, white notebooks, you've seen those? And I probably have 10 of them just filled with stuff that I'd tell you 90% of it is just garbage. It doesn't work. But I took the time to write it down, and along the way, when I feel something or I get a moment of clarity, I tend to write sentences down, and I'll put the date and my age as a reminder. And years ago, I wrote something that was very transformative for me. I wrote down, I am not a musician. I happen to have a gift which manifests itself well in music. I am not a musician. I happen to have a gift which manifests itself well in music. When I wrote that down, that changed my life, because I basically gave myself permission to dream off of the bandstand. Until then, you're thinking of yourself as a musician, everything has to be filtered through the world of music. But I took a step back and I began to realize that fundamentally what drives me in the field of music is the proliferation of empathy, right? I love the sense of connectivity that we have when we're improvising, the compassion that we share, the joy that we're able to generate collectively that is not possible for someone to generate on their own. There's something that's really beautiful about having disparate voices come together and surprise one another, and to develop the love, trust, and respect that's necessary to be vulnerable enough to let go and to discover. So for me, writing that statement down completely changed my life. I started to think about the concept of empathy. I meditated a lot on empathy. I just read a lot about it, and just more importantly, I began to look for empathy, to try to understand it, not just in a book, but in my environment, in my life, in my relationships, and in others, to observe. And so that was the start of it. Sometimes when you feel something, just writing it down and looking at it on paper can change your life if you're ready for it. You have to be open and ready. So in terms of a mission statement, it's little moments like that that force me to begin to really consolidate a real vision. So at the top of my my life plan, or what I'm dedicated to, is a statement that says, I'm dedicated to the proliferation of empathy through the arts. And so everything that comes my way, if it doesn't help me facilitate the proliferation of empathy, I'll say no to it now. I do only what I want to do now, and it's all about the proliferation of empathy. So if we're on stage and we're performing in a way that is about connectivity, like our rehearsals yesterday, we didn't just rehearse music, right? We got to know each other. We challenged one another. I was challenged, you were challenged, we grew together. And the reason we were able to grow and have such a dynamic experience in the rehearsal, it'll happen again in the concert, I'm sure, is because of the science of listening. It's not that I didn't know you when I came in. We started to play, and the entire time I was paying attention to where the band was. I was paying attention to how you were feeling. I watched you when you walked in the room. I watched how you spoke to one another. I was observing your culture, the culture of the department, so that I could understand how to effectively contribute something. So even in a situation like that, I'm always leading with empathy and understanding. So that's at the top of my mission. When I do corporate talks, it's ultimately about teaching leadership training, teaching leaders how to lead with empathy and not content knowledge, which is a very common problem. Just because you know the science the best out of everyone in the world doesn't mean you understand the science of how to inspire people and how to lead people. So I'm able to teach that using music as a tool. Again, proliferating empathy in the world through the arts.
It's so fascinating. I think it's so interesting because when you think of people who use music as a vehicle for really great achievements, a lot of times you think of people who use lyrics, words, like Nina Simone or Fela Kuti. Like they use music as it's a very powerful tool, but they also use the words to get out a clear message. I'm kind of curious about, because empathy, that's such a big and lofty goal, and I think we're probably all down with by saying it's like, hey, we want to propel empathy in the world, and we're all down with that. But can you be a little more specific how, as an instrumentalist mainly, and I know you sometimes work with lyrics too, but you're a vibraphone player and piano player, like how can you use an instrument that does not speak words to propel this?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, it's fascinating, this whole concept of sensory deprivation, where if you eliminate one sense, your other senses tend to step in to try to fill the gap. So when you lead with words, a lot of times people are accessing an intellectual perspective on what it is that you're talking about. But much of empathy has to do with quieting the ego. Most of empathy it begins with the concept of it's not about you. It doesn't matter what you think. It's just about the art of perception, right? And also empathy has no judgment. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or evil. Empathy is just being able to understand and to have a deep sense of perception about what's happening around you and the other people that are around you. Now, empathy plus compassion may lead to good in the world, but empathy in and of itself has been used by evil people and by brilliant people and by kind people. So, I actually like the thought of communicating with people without words when it comes to music. Now, when I give a talk, I'm speaking, obviously, but I think what differentiates my presentation is that the audience actually feels the content, right? I don't use any PowerPoints or anything like that. They get enough of that in the corporate world. So I may present a point, and then when we go to play it, it's deeper than them just intellectually understanding it. They can actually feel the shift on a visceral level, on an emotional level. So that's part of the benefit. And I also think there's something about the science of music and the vulnerability associated with music. This whole idea that that what you play has no importance without the context, right? You can walk in with the right answer and get the wrong results. That happens all the time in different leadership circles, right? You're absolutely right, but no one wants to follow you. And then the team doesn't behave in a way that ultimately yields you the result that you're looking for. So you have to learn how to walk in, understand who you're speaking to, and how to quickly customize what it is that you're trying to say. Because fundamentally, it's not about that end goal in terms of like, I need to get from X to Z or whatever. It's really about we need to get to X to Z. So if I just do it on my own, it'll never be as impactful. You'll never really create a great innovation in the world on your own, right? I mean, like an innovation is something that requires a revolution in the hearts of many people, right? There are lots of creative ideas that have happened in history, most of which we don't remember. We remember the innovations, and the reason the innovations are so long lasting is because they affect change in the lives of millions and millions of people, right? Like the wheel is not just a creative idea, right? It put people in the world in a place where we said it was impossible to get from New Jersey to Brown University in a day. It was just not possible. And people had that in their mind. And innovation changes what's possible, and it affects the lives of many, many people. But the only way you can do that is to understand where other people are, right? Otherwise you can create something in the abstract and not be able to apply your creation to the needs of the masses of people.
Fascinating. So you talk a lot about emotions, and when we did our rehearsal last night, I was kind of reminded of that again, because a lot of your instructions are emotive, right? And Stefon is a very dedicated educator, and I'm one of the lucky people who had the experience because I used to be a student many moons ago. And I remember the first time I came to a lesson of yours, and it's like, yeah, hi, I'm Timo, hi, I'm Stefon, and you're like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to work on my ear, because, you know, I like, and I think many here at Brown I might be able to relate, when you come from the Western way of learning music, or like a European art history context, aside from the technique of your instrument, a lot of times you learn from the score. Right? So the first thing you do is like you learn how to read music. And I mean, it's a great skill, and I'm happy that I did that partly, but what happened that the ear was lagging behind. And I came to your lesson, and you said, okay, let's do this. I give you 6 dominant 7 chords with different chord qualities. And it was a dominant 7 chord, a dominant 7, 13 sharp 11 9, dominant 7 sharp 9, a dominant 7 flat 9 flat 5, a dominant 7 sharp 9 sharp 5, and a dominant 13 flat 9. Those were the 6 options that he gave me. And you said, I'm going to play them, and you gave me no time to respond, or to think about what chord quality it might be. And did I get 10% right? Maybe, not even. By the end of the lesson, I got 100% right. And maybe you can talk about how you taught me that, and I've used it ever since. And because it taps into this idea of motion and the embodied experience of music.
Yeah, it's well, it again comes down to clarity. I always say most of us get what we want in life. You don't get all of it, usually, but you get little bits. So the challenge is being clear on what you want, right? So what is it that you want from music? So for me, my definition of music is that it's the science of organizing sound and silence into emotion. So inherent in that, and everyone can have different definitions, it's important to have your own vision because it's going to impact how you move forward, what you choose to study, how you perform. So that level of clarity for me, inherent in that definition is, first of all, it's the science. Many people don't want to think of music as a science. For me, it's so connected to physics. Of course, it's a science in my mind, and being comfortable calling it a science I gave myself permission to quantify it and to chop it up and to try to come up with a system that I could unpack for myself and also for others. So the science of organizing sound and silence, that part of silence forced me to explore the concept of breath in music, that it's not just the notes that I'm playing, it's also the notes that I'm not playing that help create an impact on the listener. It's also the space between when the mallet is here and the mallet is here. I can strike a note at the exact same volume and move physically in 2 different ways, and the audience, the viewer, perceives it completely differently. If I strike a note and I go, like you felt that a certain way, right? At the same volume, same vibration, I could go, and you feel it differently, right? So I'm thinking about, I've spent time thinking about the dance because of my definition of music, the art of organizing sound and silence. And the final part is really critical, into emotion. That's the whole point of it all for me, right? So once I wrote that definition down in one of my 500-page notebooks, you'll see right after that is like hundreds of pages of every chord I could think of with an emotional description. So if you ask me like uncomfortable fear, I can tell you, oh, that's probably a dominant 7 flat 9 flat 5. If you say, no, it's got to have a little more haunting to it, I would put a 13 with it, a 13 sharp 11 flat 9, but I would leave off the 3rd, right? If you want it to feel like this, oh, that's a minor 11 9, right? That's a sexy chord, right? And if I want to ground the sexy chord so it's less sexy, but it's a little more open, I might use like a minor 7 with a flat 13. If I want a moment of pause, I would use that 13 sharp 11 9 in a chord, right? So like a 13 sharp 11 9 chord, which is he's not here today. We were working on this yesterday. It's like a dominant 7 in the left hand, root third 7th, and you're going to play a major triad on the 2. So if that's C7, the 2 of C7 would be D. So I'm going to play a D major triad on top of it, and it creates this sort of, right? It creates a pause, but it's not grounded, right? It kind of, so if there's a moment in music where I want to create a pause, if I want to go, see? And I can do it anywhere. I could do it here, let's see. Even in a strange place like this. Right? But if I need this chord. And if I want like static energy, that's a sharp 11 with a 9 on a major. But if I put a 13 with it, it would be different. Now, this is not talent at all, right? I didn't know any of this. I literally just spent hours, and now every single chord I could come up with, I have an emotional description of every chord, and I have a physical gesture for every chord. I wrote down how my body interpreted, and I'm going to answer this. I'm getting to the answer to your question. I wrote down how my body interpreted the sound, because I realized that these sounds that I'm playing now, if you've grown up in American culture, you've probably been hearing these sounds since you were a little kid. And the reality is your body has actually been reacting to these sounds since you were a little kid. But the way we were taught was that you have to listen for the sharp 11 or a certain type of interval. But as kids, you would hear that. And I've done this for adults. I've done it at Eastman or Juilliard, and I've done it for middle school kids. And the middle school kids tend to do the best on this test because they don't listen for those small pieces. They say, oh, that's really pretty, right? And so here's the reality, is that there are things that our brain is doing to understand the world and what's happening. But when we start to think about analyzing music, we're not giving ourselves permission to use our whole self to understand what's happening. So for me, in a situation when I'm teaching ear training, it's predicated upon the idea that I know that you can already hear it. Like you already know the answer. You're getting in your own way and you're not using your feeling. So I basically will I gave him a test at that point, and it was clear like he was listening. People look up to the left, I'm like, oh, there. It's not there, it's right here actually. and all we did was just talk about, and I don't give the answer, right? I play a chord, well, tell me what you think. How's it feel? Describe it. How would you move? And then close your eyes. I'm gonna play this chord, just move as if you were a dancer. And you go through each chord, people pass it. After about 45 minutes, then you can feel it, and you have it. And you have it forever. The only thing that prevents you from being able to hear it is usually ego, right? Because it happens on stage, and then you're thinking about other things, you're distracted. The battle is to stay closely connected to our gift of perception, but our ego tends to get in the way. We're thinking about showing off. I mean, I struggle with it too. I mean, you're playing, you're trying to do this fancy stuff, and it's just, that's the journey. It's one of the beautiful journeys that a life in improvised music provides for us.
I'm really interested in the moment when you decided to check that out, because I remember when we were talking years ago, you told me that at some point, and you were at the height of your career, not that you're not at the height anymore, but you had been playing in Joe Henderson's band, you had played with Herbie, with Wayne, with all these people, had your own thing running, but you said that you had to take a step back from the vibraphone or whatever you were doing and kind of reapproach it from scratch. And I think, and that sounds very courageous to me actually, because when things are going for you, to actually kind of reinvent yourself And it makes me think of people like Wayne to some extent, and also Paul Motion, for example, who all of a sudden have this shift in their way of like music and thinking. And do you remember that moment?
Oh, sure. That was around the time that I wrote that definition of music down. And I think again, most of these things come back to issues of the ego, right? And do you want to be a star? Is that what you're after? I never wanted to be a star. I never had interest in that. I'm obsessed with witnessing the mechanics of music, more than performing even, right? Performing is a manifestation of what it is that you can see. I spend hours at a piano just like trying to not create the rules, but trying to observe the governing dynamics of harmony. And it's not something that I can read about in a book. I have to feel it and to improve my ability to perceive it. So what happened for me, I was touring and everything was going great, and I was writing music. And the special thing about writing music is a lot of times if you quiet the ego when you're writing music, usually it happens over a long enough period of time where you have moments of humility, right? Performing is so fast, it's in the moment and there are all these people watching you. But when you're writing music, you can start with a little ego, but then there's a moment where you're just like, oh, I'm just listening. Oh, that sounds like the right note. Not, I want that to be the note, but I can feel it. That sounds right. So a lot of times the music that you write, if you're patient, it's a better indication of your authentic voice than your improvisation, right? So I was at a point where I was touring, and what was happening for me was that my writing had a certain type of sound, a certain type of flair, and then my improvisation was connected to modes and, Charlie Parker and all these iconic human beings, but there was a disconnect. And I was being honest with myself. It's like, am I really hearing this, or am I just playing the changes? And I could play the changes, and people clap for you, and the other, oh, you sound great playing the changes, but I wanted to play the music, not play the changes. And I got really, really frustrated, and I got really upset, and I was like, I have to earn the right to be in front of other people, and I'm being dishonest. I'm showing off, and I'm just doing this stuff that I learned. And in the long run, around the time that I had my first child, and I've been married many years now, almost 23 years, it was challenging because I was like, is this worth not being at home with my wife and my child? Now I have 2 kids now. And I was like, it's not worth it. It's got to mean more to me to miss birthdays and games and, and the challenges that come with that. And so I said, if I can't get to the space where I'm authentically improvising, I felt my writing was authentic, but my improvising just wasn't there. And I said, I'm going to start over. And that was the challenge. That's when I said I need to have a definition of music, and I redefined. And I started over. It's funny, I was like, I have to earn the right to play the vibraphone again. So I stopped. This is a whole summer, and all I did every morning, I put on a drone, and I just said, do, like, do you understand do? Can you hear do? And I would tune to this drone, then I sang sol, then I sang mi, and I started to feel the difference between those notes. And then when I could hear and feel the notes, then I went to the vibraphone. I'm a little strange, but I only gave myself permission to use one hand, because the 2 hand, all the muscle memory and the ego. But once I played with one hand, it's like you can't do any of your stuff. You just got to play what you can hear. It totally changed. And a lot of times when I play now, people will notice, like, I'll just play with one hand, and it's usually when I'm having a moment of a flash of ego. It's just I can stop all that nonsense just by playing with one hand. And I find that I play more melodically with more clarity. And not that I'll do that the whole time, because it's nothing wrong with a fast flurry if that's the emotion. So that was kind of the challenge, and it was a challenge bigger than music, right? Like I said, it was about marriage, and it was about family, and what are you trying to do with your time on the planet? I often frame things as, I tell people, it's a little morbid, but I say, I often think about, well, my last day on this planet, right? I'm on that bed, and who do I want around me? And what will I say I did that made it all worth the journey? And when I look at things from that perspective, touring alone just wasn't it. I had played major festivals and been in the different towns all over the world, but that, like, I wouldn't feel good at the last day of my life as I was like, yeah, I played the world and I was the best vibraphonist in the world. Like, that didn't feel right. And so I started to reimagine. Now, if I can be of service and on the last day of my planet I can say I proliferated empathy in the world, I'm gonna feel better about that.
Cool. Since you were just talking about authenticity, and you mentioned Charlie Parker, who obviously was an authentic voice of his time, there's one thing that I think is very interesting, and it occurred in a lot of our conversations on talking about how to learn how to improvise and how to develop an authentic voice. And the vehicle that most young jazz musicians use is transcription, right? So we've all transcribed, and the idea behind is that you imitate somebody from the past to find out how they did it, and then to use that to develop your own language. I know that you're not necessarily an avid proponent of transcription and transcribing.
Oh, I don't transcribe at all. At all. I did some requirements when I was in college for a class or two, and my background was in classical music. So I played a little jazz going into college, but I wouldn't have gotten into college playing jazz. I really got a lot of exposure when I got to college, and so I had a little bit of an advantage, being that I didn't grow up in New Orleans or in a jazz tradition. So I was very open-minded. My mother's a Pentecostal minister, so I grew up in the black church, and I heard soulful music that was emotional and from the heart. So I always had that with me. When it came time to start to take a deeper dive into jazz, my first instinct wasn't necessarily to copy, because I could already emote. I learned a lot about emoting from the church, but then when I started to play classical music, so much of classical music is about the articulation of emotion. So much of all great music is. But I learned to really take what I was feeling and push that through in an authentic way in classical music. So when I wanted to learn jazz, it was my natural instinct wasn't to play like someone. My natural instinct was to, well, how do I play with some feeling? How do I do that? So I didn't think to transcribe. And then when I did it in a class, it was really, for the ego, it's amazing. It's amazing for the ego, because it's like you sound good right away. Right? You play Charlie Parker's licks, they're amazing, they work. But in the long run, you may not necessarily be able to arrive at an authentic voice like that. One of the things I tell students is there's nothing wrong with transcribing. Like I said, we all get what we want. You just don't get all of it. So the question is what you want. So for me, I have no interest in playing jazz, right? I'm interested in the science of communication, of being able to articulate emotion and connect and inspire other human beings. So for me to get to that, the answer has never been to copy, if that makes sense. If I said my goal was, I want to learn to play bebop, I listened to Charlie Parker and Bud Powell, and then I would tell us oh, you should transcribe, if that's your goal. So there's nothing wrong with it. It just depends on what you want. When I was making I have an album called The Grand Unification Theory, and when I was in the process of making that album, the president of Blue Note, we had a meeting, and I'm in his office, and he's like, okay, Stefon, Bruce Lundvall, this guy's amazing, he's amazing. He's like, oh, I want to share something with you that we're thinking about putting out. And I'm sitting there, and he put on the John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk Carnegie Hall concert. This is before it was released. And I listened to about a minute and a half, and I started crying, man. And I was just like, Bruce, you gotta stop. I can't take it. It was just so overwhelming. It's like, but what a great moment, because it's like, don't do that. Don't try to do that. They've already done that. That was real for them at that moment. They went down that path. And if you chase that, you're only gonna be a pale copy of the reality of what it is that they were articulating. And so that was another one of those turning points. Unfortunately, the Grand Unification Theory wasn't in that direction anyway, but my ego was so bruised by that. It just felt so impossible. I mean, when you hear John Coltrane and Thelonious, it's impossible. How do you do that? But then I was like, oh, you don't do that. They did that. And then you just let it go. But it was the ego that was gravitating. I want to be great. I want to be great like them. Once I let that go, then I could actually just be a vehicle and do a better job of articulating, being of service. I think of art as being of service. Part of the challenge that we face in terms of creating a sustainable world for the arts is that we don't understand our purpose. We think that if you're talented, people owe you something. Like, I play the vibraphone, you should pay to come see me play. Nobody, that's not why people, no one owes you anything because you have a talent. So I had to think about, well, what is my service to society? And again, I don't think musicians are any more special than a chauffeur, than a cook, than a politician, than a physicist. We're all providing some type of service. So for me, it became clear that the service has to be about articulating marginalized voices, right? So that shifted from me wanting to be great to me wanting to illuminate the great voices that are in my own community.
That's so inspiring. Speaking of service, so you used to be you're an educator and a professor at Rutgers right now. Before you were at Manhattan School of Music, but you decided to go teach at Rutgers, which is a state school, and it had to do with community and the idea of culture.
So I was the dean and director of the jazz program at Manhattan School of Music for a while, and it's funny, like I talk about community, I talk about service, and I live in New Jersey. My wife is from the city of Newark. I've lived in the city of Newark. I live just outside of Newark now. But my nieces, my nephews, my best friend, my agent, like my family is in this city. And every day I would get in my car and I would drive past my own community to drive into New York City and to give away information. And there's nothing wrong with a conservatory, but the representation of my nieces and nephews just wasn't there. My community, I did what I could to create more diversity in that program. I think we did a good job actually, but I felt like when I'm talking to students and I'm talking about the importance of articulating and amplifying the voices of your community, I wasn't authentically doing that because, I mean, I lived in Harlem for a long time, so one of the first things I did when I started at Manhattan School was to connect that institution to the other cultural anchor institutions in that community. I created a partnership with Harlem Stage, created a partnership with the Apollo, created a partnership with the Harlem School of the Arts, so I was able to do that, but meanwhile, I'm driving past my own community where my family lived every day, and I just felt like that's inauthentic on my part. And then the other part of it was the issue of cost, which is a tough issue for all of us, right? The cost of higher education. I felt that there was no way that I could get on a phone with a parent and you know people's finances when you're going through this and ask someone to give up that much money for their child to get a degree in jazz. Like, I just felt like if I stayed, I would feel like I'm playing a role in bankrupting the next generation of young artists. And so for me, I feel like the potential home, because I think that bubble's gonna burst. It's definitely gonna burst. There used to be, 200 conservatories, there's 7 now, standalone conservatories. So that's gonna burst. And I feel like it's important that artists have a space that they can cultivate their gifts. So I think the home should be with state institutions because the missions are more aligned. I think community colleges would be amazing spaces for arts education. Right? I gave us some free master classes at this community college outside of Philadelphia. This beautiful studio, great facilities, like all these amazing musicians in Philadelphia. It's like $2,000 a year to go there. You put a great faculty together, and then people can come get a high quality education at an affordable price. So I moved to not just Rutgers, but Rutgers Newark, which doesn't even have a music program. So I went from running Manhattan School's program to going into an environment where there's no music program. My classroom is filled with people who don't know what a middle C is, don't know anything on the piano. But the final project, they sit at the piano, they play an original piece of music. They play the chords, they've learned to read, right? So it's like, I've never been more inspired. And the other thing I love about it that's been transformative for me is the idea that I'm actually focused on putting art in the hands of as many people as possible, not just elite musicians. Because I have some sense of the understanding of the potential for art to transform the way that people experience the world and also the way that they do their jobs, whether it's law or whatever field you go into. This idea that you've experienced empathy, that you've experienced being comfortable and understanding the value of not knowing, that ultimately is the first opportunity towards learning, is to actually be comfortable with, I don't know. And I think having people have that type of experience outside of music has been amazing. Now I'm building there, but right now my classroom is filled with non-musicians, and I just absolutely love it. It's been so humbling, and it's been one of the greatest creative challenges and experiences in my life. I love it.
Man, Stefon, it's great to have you here. We're super excited about the concert tonight, and I hope, well, we have some members of the band here, and I hope everyone else is able to check out the show. But I do want to give voice to our students and visitors, so I think I'm just going to give up my mic, or I think we probably can hear each other here anyway. Is there anything you'd like to ask, Stefon?
Thank you for sharing your experiences, by the way, and your philosophy.
Thank you.
You talk about ego, and I'm curious if you find any role that ego has in music, if at all. You know, what is that role? And maybe there is no place for it in music.
Oh no, there's definitely a place for ego. Like I grew up poor, and I didn't have a lot of opportunities. So for me, I had to cultivate the audacity to believe that it could be me, right? So there's a certain level of confidence that I have, that I have to generate, that I don't always have, right? I second guess myself, and one of the things that I'm working on personally is to stop saying like, well, I don't know how to do that. Because I haven't had a lot of exposure outside. I didn't know how to do a corporate talk. I didn't know how to do a TED Talk. My TED Talk was like the most popular TED Talk for like, when I did it for a long time, and I didn't even know what a TED Talk was. Someone asked me to do this, I was okay, cool. And I went that morning, it was at Lincoln Center, and it was a room full of behavioral economists. It had nothing to do with music. And I said, I'm gonna go early, I'm gonna listen to other people talk. I listened to what they were saying, and they were all talking about their future self, right? And I was like, well, that's like spending most of your energy towards something that may or may not happen. The real gift is understanding how to manifest the possibilities that are happening right now around you. And so I thought about it, and I was sitting in the audience, and I just wrote some thoughts down, and I gave a TED Talk. But my ego, my ego was like, oh, I don't know how to do this, man. What do you do? But I'm big on taking stretch opportunities. Like I shake. I do things I have no idea about, and I'm just like, well, you gotta go in and try. But that takes a little bit of, it's not arrogance, but I do need to build myself up to say that it's possible for me. Questions, observations? I'm here for you. Cool.
I think another thing you mentioned, like kind of at the beginning, was like the idea of vulnerability with regards to ego. Like, could you talk maybe more about like how that might like sort of manifest like in your life and like music and stuff?
Yeah, vulnerability. Brene Brown is an amazing thinker and someone who really spends a lot of time talking about vulnerability. So check her out if you can. I think about vulnerability a lot with regard to love, because love requires connection. It requires space for other people, right? So if I'm perfect, the other person is trying to partner with me, there's no space for them. You need to be able to be vulnerable, and then someone else can step into that space and feel like, wow, I can help you with that, and they feel supported. And what happens is it allows people to see you, right? Everyone wants to be seen, and if you're never vulnerable, of course we all are, everyone is. It's a question of, do you have the humility to share those insecurities? So I think of vulnerability as an opportunity to create connection with other people. It's beautiful to be wrong. It's beautiful to make mistakes and to say, like, I don't know. I just can't live in that space. I can't let I don't know paralyze me, which I've done in the past. It was like, oh, I've been very deferential to other people. Well, they're the expert on this, and okay, I don't really know. Then you come to realize, like, actually, I do know. I can see something that even they can't see. Doesn't matter what field you're going to. You're going to run into these types of challenges. This is inherent in human nature and relationships.
Further thoughts?
wonderful energy. I'm reminded of when an artist speaks, and that artist, a painter, a sculptor, a musician, the words aren't just words, they come through practice. And I'm reminded of a beautiful workshop I went to in the 70s with Sugo Urashi, playing the classical saxophone. When it came to the Q&A, the student says, "What kind of reed do you use?" And his answer, "Did you ever bake bread?" It was the most perfect. Yeah. I never forgot that. It was just a gift.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
And you're
beautiful.
applying the same gifts. to
Oh.
us. Thank you.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks so much, Stefan. I'm curious, for someone who is so focused on connecting emotionally with people, the vibraphone, it's an instrument that you are so eloquent on it, and I love your playing, but it's like, it's a very indirect channel, it seems to me, of the choices of instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've heard you play, you're a fantastic pianist also, you're a fantastic drummer, I've heard you play all those things. What do you think it is about the vibraphone? How do you relate that? I mean, did you consider it kind of a challenge to say, okay, vibraphone, it's stacked against me for being super expressive and connected because it doesn't have a lot of variety as other instruments. You find more variety. Now I know it has more because I've heard you play. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
No,
did you ever get tempted to play another instrument or?
all the time. All the time. Like this is a very frustrating instrument, but I think what saved me from just throwing in the mallets is I realized that, well, instruments are just a bunch of metal and wood. It really doesn't matter. Like, if you are an authentic person and you're able to emote before you play the note, people can feel it. It's just an alloy. You hit it. It's nothing special. But I began to focus more on the emotion, being able to articulate it away from the instrument. Once I was able to do that, then I could understand how to push something through the instrument. But there's a fascinating phenomenon that occurs that I don't know if it's been documented, but we were talking with Stefan Alexander yesterday about this whole concept of when you observe a phenomenon, sometimes it changes it, right? It's really fascinating. There's an interesting dynamic with walking on stage. Like, I've seen people walk on stage and the audience falls in love with them before they even start. There's something in their energy and in their personality that people perceive and they don't even understand it. So for me, to be straightforward, I rarely practice the vibraphone. The vast majority of my time is spent studying at the piano. There's some physical things that you need to do to just maintain your ability, but I'm constantly working on that energy of understanding how chords feel, how to emote. And then, the funny thing about this instrument, I play it just because I used to play 27 instruments when I was a kid. I played all the band instruments. I just was in love with music. And when I auditioned for the Empire State Youth Orchestra, which we were in together, so amazing, I had to pick 2 instruments. They wouldn't let me audition on all the instruments. So I auditioned on percussion and on clarinet because those were my strongest instruments. And I was accepted as a percussionist and I got alternate as a clarinetist, so I played that instrument. It's not a particular love of the instrument. I'll tell you the thing about this instrument that's fascinating is it's the easiest instrument to start on, right? You can start making it's in tune right away, right? It's just left, right, so it's a little easier than the dexterity required for piano. There's no embouchure. You can make music on it pretty quickly, but it's one of the most difficult instruments to reach a high level of emotional expression on because you can't bend notes. It's not a wide range of dynamics, and so I don't know what I'm going to show you, but I'll grab a mallet. And again, it's this phenomena of the music happening before you actually strike the note, right? So, like, I made you feel that way by how I approached the instrument, right? If I did this, you already feel differently, don't you? Just the way that I walked up to the instrument affected your emotions. So I think a lot about that physical nature. So there are times where I might just see that right there. I'm waiting, and I'm waiting because I can hear that note. I don't have perfect pitch, but I can hear that note, and I know the feeling, and I'm trying to get to the physical feeling. And then when I find it, nope. See, that wasn't it. But it's. See? So a lot of it has to do with perception, and there's a lot of magic, believe it or not, in being able to perceive the space between notes. Like understanding that if I go, and the funny thing is it changes every time you do it, so this is tricky to demonstrate, but if I go, I loves you, Porgy, let's say. Right? I could feel that there needed to be a pause before I played that. I'll do it again, maybe there won't be a pause, let's see. I love you, Porgy. See, this time there wasn't a pause between the C and the E. But it's not that I'm deciding it, it's just that I can feel based on what happens from one note to the next. So a lot of people, I think human beings are reacting to the organic flow. I think people can feel that, right? So if I did that here, if I did it on a piano, if I could play the tuba or something, if I had that organic flow, it's almost like there's something that exists that is the truth. And the closer everybody can sense it, but you can't articulate it. So the closer you get to that, the more people can see what it is that you're doing. Now, if I just did, like that feels very different, because I'm not waiting. I'm just playing. I love you, Porgy, but I love you, Porgy. Don't let him take me. Da da da, ya da 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 do, eh, ah do do dee ah, ho ah da la da da do dee, do 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 dee do, da 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 da. See, that's what's happening. When I'm playing, I'm literally, sometimes it looks like I'm singing, but I'm not singing, I'm talking. So when I play, I don't play quarter, 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 eighth note. I play, I loves you, Porgy. Don't let him take me. I love you, Porgy. Don't let him take me. Sa do do ah da 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 do ah da ah da oh do de da all the way ah da oh do ah da 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 do do ooh dee ah da oh e ah e ah e ah eh ah oh oh eh ah ya da da oh boo 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 boo. So I'm talking, and everyone understands that language. Everyone understands the rhythm, regardless of what language you speak. It's a long way of saying that this doesn't matter. Music's fun too. You should have fun with it. And those of you who go into other fields of study, we were talking about this last night. I highly recommend, and I do this for myself, that you understand it's a privilege to have a vehicle of expression. It's an honor. And one of the things I talked about during the pandemic, I was doing a bunch of interviews, I started to think more about gratitude, and that's one of the things I'm really focused on these days. I realized, like, wow, every day during the pandemic, I woke up with a smile. With everything that was going on, all the trauma, and I've gone through losses of family and friends, but every day I woke up and it was like there was something I was excited to do. There was something I was excited to learn. Every day I woke up, I was like, wow, I think I'm gonna figure that out today. I think I'm closer, and I go to that piano. And so I've carved out a beautiful space in my life for music that has nothing to do with making a living, right? And I encourage anyone, you don't have to be a professional musician. That's not the point of, of art. But to have that space where you just get to emote, where you just get to express joy, where you get to get into a space where it's okay not to know, and it's just, you're just spending time discovering, that's an amazing thing. It certainly made me a better father, a better husband, and a better friend. So whatever it is you do, please, whatever form of expression you choose, carve out a little private space for yourself in your life, and I think it's transformative. I couldn't be more humbled and grateful for the exposure and the opportunity to participate in creation.
All right, I think this is a very good closing statement, right? Man, Stefon, it's great to have you here, to see you again.
Yeah, oh man, I got to tell you, this guy is brilliant. If you don't already know, I've been a fan of his for so long. Just a brilliant thinker, an unbelievable sound. What a great musician! But he has that important balance of understanding how to emotionally express yourself, but then that other step of understanding how to chop things up so that it can be articulated and shared with other people. And that's at the heart of what makes a great educator. So I think you guys are really lucky to have Timo here, and I know that things are going to be really fantastic under his leadership. So,
Man, thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate you. Give it up for Stefon.
Thank you, everyone.